This dog looked into the drain every day, but when it was opened, everyone was amazed. A young woman reached for her phone and called the fire department. She would definitely need their help. About 30 minutes afterward, 2 firefighters arrived and inquired about the woman's condition. After he gave them an explanation of what she had witnessed, the men immediately went to work. The dog had cheerfully trotted along the road and waved his tail at everyone who looked his way, as the day had begun normally. The dog, despite being homeless, was genuinely quite friendly and enjoyed petting passers-by. The animal was traveling down a certain street when he caught an odor of something tasty. He followed his nose to a butcher's shop and watched as customers bought large chops of meat. Just looking at the food made the dog realize how hungry he was, and his stomach growled loudly. Inside the shop, a young woman named Annie paid for some steaks, thanked the butcher, and left. As she walked home, she heard a loud gurgle and a whimper. She turned to see the stray dog looking at her with sad eyes, his stomach growling again. Feeling bad for the hungry stray, Annie returned to the butcher and asked for any cut-offs or bones. The butcher gave her some, and she went back outside to find the dog. She crouched down and held out a bone. At first, the dog was cautious, but soon he couldn't resist and came closer to get the meal. Finally, Annie gained enough of the animal's trust that he wagged his tail and accepted the large bone from her. Instead of eating it, the dog picked it up and walked off as if he had somewhere to be. Confused but not wanting to question it, she stood up and went back home. The next day, Annie saw the same stray dog. The dog noticed her too and came bounding up, tail wagging. Annie smiled at his enthusiasm and fussed over him, but she had places to be. Before leaving, she bought him some sausages, but again, he walked off with them. Curious about the dog's behavior, Annie didn't have time to follow him that day. On the third day, she found the dog seemingly waiting for her. She had started carrying treats and giving them to the dog. This time, when the dog walked away, Annie followed him. They came to a busy street where the dog approached a storm drain, dropped a treat into it, and then ate his own. Annie was confused. For the next few days, the dog repeated this behavior, dropping half the food into the drain. Annie's curiosity grew, and she decided to investigate. When she approached the storm drain, the dog stood guard but watched her curiously. Once Annie was above the drain, she gasped at what she saw. She quickly called the fire department for help. About half an hour later, a couple of firemen arrived, and Annie explained the situation. They approached the storm drain, but a stray dog started growling at them. The firemen hesitated, unsure what to do, but Annie calmly walked up to the dog, reassuring it. She offered a treat, and when the dog approached, she grabbed hold of it to keep it away from the drain and the firemen. With the stray out of the way, the firemen got to work opening the storm drain by this point because the drain was in the middle of a busy street. A crowd had formed around the firemen to see what they were doing. After a few tense minutes, the firemen finally revealed what the stray dog had been so focused on inside the drain. In one of the firemen's arms was a tiny kitten. All of the bystanders were shocked, but that wasn't the end of it. The firemen dove back into the storm drain 4 more times, each time emerging with another kitten in their arms. Annie was astonished by what she saw. She knew there was something down there, having peeked in herself, but she had no idea there were 5 tiny, adorable kittens trapped. At that moment, the stray dog wriggled free from Annie's arms and bounded over to the fireman holding the kittens. As soon as the dog saw the small felines, he began wagging his tail and sniffing at them, while the kittens mewed back at him. Annie walked over to the fireman and asked how such young kittens ended up in this predicament. They explained that the kittens were likely swept into the drain during a heavy rain. Despite being trapped, they hadn't starved, which puzzled the fireman. Annie realized that it was thanks to the stray dog sharing his food each day that the kittens had survived. Witnessing this act of selflessness, she knew what she wanted to do. She told the fireman she would take the kittens home and raise them until they were ready to be adopted. The fireman agreed and handed the kittens to Annie. As she made her way home, she called out to the stray dog, "Come on, Benny. It's time to go home." The dog happily bounded up to her, and together, they found loving homes for 5 of the kittens when they were old enough to move. Annie kept 1 kitten for herself, having grown to love them dearly, and Benny finally had a home to call his own.